Welcome to The Catch Up, a podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. It's Tuesday morning, July 29th. My name is Walter Mullen, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
And I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of the Daily Catch.
In this podcast, we discuss stories that have appeared in the Daily Catch. We give you insights into how we put the stories together, offer additional observations, and discuss where the stories may be heading as we move forward. And just a quick reminder to listeners, if you enjoy The Catch Up, please be sure to follow us so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. Today, we're happy to welcome Daily Catch reporter Claire Greenberger into the studio with us. Emily, you and Claire are going to be talking about an important story that first appeared in the Daily Catch on July 19th.
We are going to be turning our attention today to the story of Gerson Turcios, and we're so lucky today to have with us to be interviewed Claire Greenberger, who is the reporter who actually covers education across both Rhinebeck and Red Hook and has taken on the Gerson Turcios story almost since it broke. So a week ago Friday, Gerson, who's a 23-year-old man who had been living in Rhinebeck since he immigrated from Honduras about 6 years ago, was arrested by ICE agents outside his Rhinebeck village home, and he's now being held at a county jail in Orange County. For many in our community, this national news about increased deportation efforts and ICE raids has suddenly become painfully local. And in response, members of the community have rallied, raising more than $70,000, traveling to Manhattan to attend his court hearing last Wednesday, and working to secure legal representation for Gerson. So Claire, who's been covering this story almost from the get-go, is going to be talking to us today about exactly what has happened so far. Claire, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So Claire, let's go back and have you tell us exactly what happened on that Friday afternoon, July 18th, that has shaken so many people in our community.
Yeah, so that Friday, it was around 5 p.m. and Gerson Turcios had just wrapped up a landscaping job in Rhinebeck and he was driving home. And as he pulled into his driveway, two ICE agents were parked on his street waiting outside his house. And from what we've heard, ICE was actually there looking for someone else that day, another undocumented person in the area who has a criminal record. But when they saw Gerson, they walked up to his car, used a facial recognition scanner to confirm who he was, and put him in handcuffs, and he was taken away. And I'll also add that this kind of arrest, where ICE agents come looking for one person and detain someone else instead, has just become increasingly common across the country as the Trump administration has sought to deport an increasing number of undocumented immigrants.
Mm-hmm. So Claire, does your reporting suggest that this is part of that quota system we've been hearing about, or is there any way to really know?
Yeah, so we know that throughout President Trump's campaign, he repeatedly promised to launch the largest deportation campaign in American history. And in just the first 6 months of his presidency, we've seen immigration enforcement shift pretty dramatically. So for some background context, in the year leading up to President Trump's second inauguration, ICE was making about 200 arrests a day. But right after January 21st, that number jumped to around 600 arrests a day. And then in May, the administration rolled out, as you just mentioned, a new quota that directs ICE to arrest 3,000 people per day. And since then, the daily average has risen to about 1,000 arrests. And I'll also say that that number, 3,000 arrests, is completely unheard of, and ICE has never come close to hitting that quota. But Gerson's arrest really shows what that looks like on the ground. He's someone who has no criminal record. He's been living and working in the community, and still he was picked up. And that's happening more and more across the country. And we've been seeing that as ICE tries to meet those targets. They're sweeping up people like Gerson, who many say have just done everything right since arriving in the U.S.
Oh, that's really interesting. Tell us, Claire, a little more about Gerson. What do we know about him? Just everything you can possibly tell us, and his role in the community, his schooling, et cetera. And know about his life in Honduras as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Gerson is a 23-year-old Honduran immigrant who came to the U.S. in late 2019 and settled in Rhinebeck, where he has some family. And soon after he arrived, he enrolled in Rhinebeck High School, and he was placed as a sophomore despite being a little bit older than a typical sophomore age. but he arrived with hardly any English skills, and he worked hard to improve and participated in the school's English language learner program. And by the time he graduated, his English had come a really long way. And while he was in school, he also worked really hard to earn money to support himself and also send money back to his family in Honduras. He washed dishes at night at Le Petit Bistro and took on landscaping and construction jobs whenever he could. Eventually, he saved up enough money to start his own landscaping business, which had kind of been his goal since coming to the US. And in just the past few months, that business had really started to take off. This spring, he managed to invest in equipment. He bought mowers and weed whackers and a trailer, and he was excited about what's ahead. And people close to him say that things were really looking up for Gerson at the time he was arrested. And I've also spent the days since his arrest talking with several of Gerson's close friends and his family and employers to get a sense of who he was in the Rhinebeck community. And it's become clear to me just how deeply appreciated Gerson was. He's someone who's definitely been through a lot in his life, and in many respects, he's had to mature very quickly. But everyone I spoke to said he just has always exuded so much positivity and optimism. And yeah, pretty much everyone I spoke to, they mentioned his big smile and this kind of light, easy energy that he brings with him wherever he goes. And his clients also told me how hardworking and reliable he is and just how much care and thought he puts into his landscaping work.
Claire, tell us a little bit, let us take a step back. How do you as a reporter find the people to talk to about Gerson, and have you been able to talk to him directly yet?
Yeah, so in this particular case, I have been involved in some of the organizing efforts. I've been able to be on the ground with the organizers. So last Wednesday, which I can share more about, a group of people from the Rhinebeck community organized to go to one of his court hearings. And at that hearing, I was able to meet a lot of people from the community who knew Gerson or knew of Gerson, some of his family members, some of his friends who he went to high school with. So from there, I that's how I usually find sources to talk to. In this case, that's how I found sources to talk to. And often when I'm talking to a source, I'll ask at the end of our conversation, who are 3 other people you recommend I speak to about Gerson? So that's a great way to kind of build a network of sources. And in this case, I have not spoken to Gerson personally since he's been arrested, and there are certain details of his past that we have decided at this point not to report on. You asked about his life in Honduras a little bit, and while of course we've heard things from friends and family about his life in Honduras, as a practice as journalists, we generally try to avoid publishing secondhand information, and that's primarily just to avoid spreading unconfirmed rumors. So since I have not spoken to Gerson personally at this time, we are not commenting on that background because many of those details about his past are things that we'd want to hear directly from Gerson.
Interesting. And Claire, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, you cover education. Tell us a little bit about how a person like Gerson, who's here illegally, it sounds like, is able to get an education in the Rhinebeck schools. What do the Rhinebeck schools know about his background, and how are students like this accepted into Rhinebeck and Red Hook schools, if we know?
Yeah, so all students, regardless of their documentation status, are entitled to an education under New York state law. So I believe it's as long as you're under 21 years old, you're entitled to an education, and the school is not going to ask questions about your documentation status. So that's why Gerson was entitled to that education. And I've also heard from many classmates that Gerson was pretty quickly just accepted into the community, and none of the other students were asking questions about his documentation status either. He was just welcomed pretty quickly. Rhinebeck, is a very small school and it's a tight-knit community, and he quickly became a part of that, in part because he just really wanted to integrate as well and really wanted to learn English and make friends in that community.
So Claire, you mentioned something really interesting about your technique. You were able to gather some sources by going on the bus, it sounds like, down to the city last Wednesday. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you even found out about the bus ride and how you were able to get a seat on that bus to enhance your reporting on the story?
Yeah, so in the days after his arrest, there was well, first of all, I'll say that many members of the community were outraged and devastated by Gerson's arrest, and they moved to action very quickly. So within days, a group called New York Neighbors United formed to support him, and they launched this big fundraising campaign. And in less than a week, more than 800 people donated, raising over $75,000 to cover his legal fees. And they also moved quickly to help Gerson find a lawyer. And from what I've heard these days, it is extremely difficult to find an immigration lawyer at the last minute, but they managed to do so. So when Gerson had his first court hearing since his arrest in Manhattan last Wednesday, they organized a bus ride for people to travel from Rhinebeck to New York City to demonstrate their support. They also had community members write character references on his behalf, testifying to his strong character and the important role he has played in their community. So I heard about this bus ride that they were organizing because I was kind of following the organizing efforts of the New York Neighbors United group. And once we heard about it, I actually joined them for the ride down on Wednesday morning, and I'll say it was a very moving moment and experience. We all met just before 7 a.m. in the Tops parking lot in Rhinebeck, and a lot of people had only heard about the hearing in the past 24 hours, but they really just dropped everything to be there. So some people drove or took the train down, but those of us who took the bus, we really got to know each other on the way down, and it was just a total mix of people who were there. So one person was a mutual friend of Gerson's from Rhinebeck High School. Another was a client of Gerson's landscaping business. One was a fifth grade Rhinebeck teacher, and there were also others there who had never met Gerson, but just felt so strongly about what was happening that they wanted to be there. And something that struck me also was just that everyone on the bus that day came on their own. So nobody was in a pair with a friend. They were all by themselves. And something about that felt really powerful because I think it kind of takes a lot to get on a bus by yourself at the crack of dawn to support someone you may not even know personally. But it showed just, how deeply people were affected by Gerson's arrest and how committed they were to showing up. Also, another woman who was on the bus was this woman named Adonia Williams, who is a close family friend of Gerson's. And for the first half of the bus ride, everybody just kind of gathered around her as she shared stories about Gerson's life, and she reminisced about his past 5 years in the US and just everything he's accomplished in that short time. And everyone just kind of listened to her talk and tell these stories. So there was definitely some nervous energy amongst the group as we were heading to the courthouse, but I'd say overwhelmingly, there was a lot of hope, and people were comforted to believe that they'd get to see him in court that day and that he would also see us all there too, there in support of him. And what I also heard from people that day was this feeling of, finally I can do something. So for months, folks have been watching the news and hearing about arrests and deportations and just feeling kind of helpless. And now here there was something tangible that they could be a part of. And I felt like there was something really beautiful in that, this idea that in the face of something awful, people were just stepping up in whatever way they could. So that was kind of the mood and feeling as we approached the city.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Claire. Tell us, before we get too far ahead, talking about the groundswell of support, which is fascinating to hear about, what actually did happen last Wednesday, both from a legal perspective and from a tactical perspective in terms of what went on down in the courthouse?
Yeah, so as we got to the courthouse in New York City, the group, we all went through security and we went up to the courthouse on the 15th floor. And outside of the courthouse, there were actually two different groups kind of clustered. And the group that I came with on the bus didn't realize at first that both those groups were there for Gerson. They figured that the other group was probably for a different court case or something. But when they realized that everyone there was actually all for Gerson, it was just kind of staggering. There were more classmates and clients and people who had written letters for him. So it was quite a moment to realize. But then at about 11 a.m., everyone funneled into the courtroom and they just totally filled the benches, which was quite shocking, because you can imagine that in many of these cases, immigration cases, there's often nobody there. So I think everyone just felt really glad that they were part of this strong demonstration of support.
And then who was the judge and what happened? What was the issue in front of the judge and what actually happened?
So the judge was a woman named Judge Ronnie Abrams, and she proceeded with the hearing. It was a pretty short hearing. It was about 30 minutes or so, and they gave Gerson's attorney a chance to speak. She also acknowledged all the supporters in the room. She said she understood, how heartbreaking it must be for everybody, and that it's clear that he's so deeply loved in the community. But she ultimately ended up saying that in this case, her hands were somewhat tied because this case was in federal district court. And she said that what a federal judge can do in district court is fairly limited when it comes to deportation orders. But what the judge did end up doing is that she extended the 1-week temporary order, which was keeping Gerson in the US from being deported. So she extended that for 1 week. And just for some background, on Monday, a judge issued an order preventing the government from deporting Gerson or removing him from New York pending a hearing. So the result of that hearing on Wednesday was this 1-week extension of that temporary order.
So 1 week would be up tomorrow, Claire. So what is the next step?
So after the court case, I think people were all like a little bit confused about if this is good news or not. They didn't really know how to interpret it. But everyone gathered outside the courthouse, and one of the organizers, Luciano Valdivia, explained that this was actually quite a win because that week gives lawyers time to reopen Gerson's immigration case, which the lawyers hope will result in him being able to stay in the US. So basically, the ruling gave this week, gave more time, and that more time means opportunity to potentially fight this deportation. So right now, the attorneys are working on reopening his immigration case.
Got it. And we don't know where that's going to land. Like, it's still, even though he got the 1 week extra that made Luciano and others very happy, it's still possible, very likely, it sounds like, that he may be deported.
Yeah, I couldn't say at this point. The lawyers are not commenting on the ongoing details of the case, and we are still waiting for another hearing to be scheduled, and there haven't been any developments on that front.
Okay. I feel like in this conversation we've had, maybe I haven't asked you enough about Gerson. So, and I guess it ties in also with my final question for you, which is why this groundswell of support? If you could just maybe marry those two questions together. What is it about Gerson that has made people so galvanized in Rhinebeck, do you think?
Yeah, I think a big reason for the groundswell of support for Gerson is that so many people in the community really know Gerson and they care about him. And I've heard the same question being asked again and again by so many people in the community. People are just asking, why him? Why Gerson? So people are definitely heartbroken and confused because he's someone who's worked hard, he's stayed out of trouble, he's contributed to the local economy and the life of the community. But I'll also say that I think that response reflects something bigger too, this kind of national frustration that we're seeing across the country. I think Gerson's case puts a human face on what so many people see as a broken immigration system. So for months, people have been following stories about ramped up enforcement and deportations across the country, but realizing that it's happening locally and to someone they know makes it feel much more real. And I'll also say there's this understanding here in Rhinebeck and Red Hook that immigration labor is vital to the local economy, whether it's agriculture, landscaping, or service work. People recognize that immigrants play an invaluable role, and Gerson's arrest is raising questions about what it means when someone like him, who's contributing so much, is suddenly taken away, and what the consequences could be if this persists.
That's a great summary. I remember when I first started covering this case, the first thing I heard was that Gerson was willing to spend an entire day pulling poison ivy out of the ground. And as a gardener myself, with a garden that is rife with poison ivy, I was so appreciative, just, I don't know, just identifying with the gratitude that that homeowner must have felt. So I don't want to do that kind of work. I have to do it sometimes, but it's really nice that we can lean on just a whole cadre of different kinds of workers in our communities who can help us get the basic jobs done. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining our show today. And I know you'll keep us posted as the story unfolds.
Yes, of course.
That was interesting to hear firsthand from Claire, and the Daily Catch will be following the story as it moves forward. So we're going to wrap up with Ask Emily and Walter. And today, Emily, I'm going to be asking you a question.
Have at it, Walter.
This week, we're welcoming a new reporter to the team, Eloise Goldsmith. Readers will soon start to see her byline in stories. So, Emily, here's my question. When you are recruiting candidates to join your reporting team, what are the top 3 qualifications you look for?
I only get 3, Walter. Okay, I'll do my best. I'd say the most important is curiosity. We need reporters who, on any subject that they're tackling, and just in their general lives, are curious about people, curious about how the world works. And it goes a step beyond that. They are willing to push that curiosity forward when they're confused, because reporters are constantly changing the topics about which they're grappling. One day it's the parking at the Rhinecliff Hotel. The next day it's understanding a solar array project. The next day it's a new merchant. And they need to be able to gain facility rapidly with a variety of topics. So that's number 1. I'd say second is empathy. We want reporters who have a great deal of personal care for their fellow human beings. At the same time, they need to be able to report dispassionately, and they need to push through when they're interviewing somebody who is dealing with a crisis. They need to remember that their audience is the reader. And that's the second really important criteria. And then I'd say a third, if I'm limited to 3, is intelligence. And a variety of different kinds of intelligence are necessary, but I'm talking about just crude ability to understand complex sets of facts. Not all stories have those complex sets of facts, but many do. And it's incumbent upon a reporter to be able to look at complex, nuanced information and make their way through it. And I would say that if we get all 3 of those criteria, we're well on our way. The fourth, though, that I'll add is we need people who are facile writers and don't freeze under deadline pressure. Because we're covering meetings. For example, last night, Eloise was out at her very first town board meeting, and there were 3 different topics worthy of stories. And she has to come home, and if not right last night, get right on the horn this morning and be ready to bang out 3 different stories, because that's what our readers expect of us. So how does that sound, Walter? Are you ready to join the team?
I am not ready to leave my publishing role and join your side of the team, but I think that's fantastic. And I'll echo your point about curiosity. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, and we should mention, Walter, that you're often involved in helping us identify candidates and interview. And I'd just ask you, what's the most important criteria that you find when you are talking to our candidates?
I'm going to say curiosity. I often ask that same question myself. And more often than not, every candidate does mention curiosity. I think that's a driving factor in being a good reporter.
Yes, good.
So we look forward to welcoming Eloise, and readers can watch for her byline in the coming days. This concludes this episode of The Catch Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite platform so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. Thank you to Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecliff for their help in producing today's episode. And thank you to Esther Martell for her help with editing. Emily, it's always a pleasure catching up.
Always great, Walter. Thanks for being here.